Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I take my food seriously. Not in a pretentious way or anything like that. I just know what I like and I go out of my way to get it. Ever since I moved into my own place, one of the small luxuries I gave myself was keeping my kitchen stocked exactly the way I wanted it. No more sharing shelves with 5 other people, no more mystery hands dipping into my groceries, no more coming home to find something I bought specifically for myself already half gone. That was the dream anyway. Then my aunt moved in. She needed a place to stay for a while, and I said yes because family is family and I genuinely didn't mind helping her out. She's not a bad person overall, but she has this habit of treating shared living spaces like everything in them is communal property, including things that very clearly belong to one specific person. My groceries, my snacks, my drinks in the back of the fridge that I clearly labeled with my name. I had talked to her about it more than once. I told her straight up that I didn't mind her using some things, but that my sauces and condiments were off limits because I go through them on a specific schedule and buy them specifically for myself. She told me to relax and said she barely used anything. I pushed back gently and said I'd still appreciate it if she asked first. She'd nod, say sure, and then 2 weeks later I'd find something missing or nearly empty. The sauce at the center of this story is one I always pick up when I make a trip out to Costco. It's called bachan's. If you've never had it, imagine a Japanese-style barbecue sauce that eats like a better version of soy sauce. It's mellow, it's savory, it's got this slightly sweet depth to it that makes it work on literally everything. I put it on rice, on eggs, on grilled chicken, on vegetables. The bottles they sell at Costco are massive too, 34 fluid ounces, and even at that size they don't last as long as you'd think when you use a sauce as regularly as I do. So when I pulled my current bottle out of the fridge one evening and felt that it was way lighter than it should have been, I stood there for a second just staring at it. A quarter of the bottle was gone. Not a small splash that could be explained away by a cooking accident. A full quarter of a 34-ounce bottle just vanished. I'd only had it for 3 days. I set it down on the counter and did a quick mental review of every meal I'd made since I bought it. There was no version of that math where I used that much, so I went and found my aunt in the living room and asked her directly if she'd been using my bachan sauce. She didn't even hesitate when she admitted it. She said she'd been putting it on a few things and that she thought it was really good. I reminded her that I'd asked her not to use my stuff without asking first. She brushed it off and said it was just sauce, and that I had a huge bottle so it wasn't like she was draining it. I told her that wasn't really the point and brought up the fact that I'd already told her before that I didn't want her using my sauces, and that I'd even offered to buy her her own bottle so she'd have something to use without touching mine. She called me dramatic about food and said she lived there too. I decided not to push it further in that moment because I already knew how the rest of that argument was going to go. She'd deflect, I'd get frustrated, and nothing would actually change. So instead I went back to the kitchen, picked up my bachan's bottle, and started thinking. The thing about bachan's is that it has this really specific quality that sets it apart from regular soy sauce. It's much more mellow. The saltiness is dialed back significantly compared to straight soy sauce, which is exactly why my aunt liked it. She finds regular soy sauce way too sharp and salty. She'd mentioned that before whenever I cooked with it. I looked at the bachan's bottle. I looked at the soy sauce sitting next to it on the shelf. They were close enough in color that you'd really have to be paying attention to tell them apart once they were in the same container. I poured about half of what was left in my bachan's bottle into a separate container to set aside for myself. Then I filled the bottle back up to where it had been using regular soy sauce. I gave it a little swirl, held it up to the light. Looked basically the same. I put it back in the fridge, right where she'd been getting it from, and I went about my evening. I didn't have to wait long. The next day I came downstairs to make myself dinner and my aunt was standing at the kitchen sink drinking water like she was trying to put out a fire. She had the glass refilled twice by the time I got to the stove. She said something about the water pressure being slow and that she had no idea why she'd been so thirsty. I started pulling ingredients out of the fridge without saying anything. I grabbed my separate container of real bacchans from behind a leftover box where I'd stashed it and poured some over my chicken. She watched me do it and then looked at the bottle still sitting on the shelf. She asked if that was a different bottle. I told her that the one I was using was mine, and that the one she'd been helping herself to was the one I'd left out on purpose. She grabbed it, smelled it, and her face shifted immediately. She said it wasn't the same sauce. I told her she was right, that it wasn't, and explained that I'd mixed in regular soy sauce after she helped herself to a quarter of my bottle without asking, even after I'd told her multiple times not to. She called it petty. I told her that she'd been told not to use my things, that I'd offered to buy her her own bottle, and that she kept doing it anyway. So now she knew exactly what regular soy sauce tasted like when she wasn't expecting it. She put the bottle down and didn't say another word about it. She also didn't touch anything of mine in that fridge for the next several weeks. I did eventually buy her her own bottle of bacchans and put her name on it. She uses that one now and leaves mine alone. My wife and I have been married for almost 15 years. We met in our mid-20s, got married young by most people's standards, and started having kids not long after. Our son came first, and then 4 years later, our daughter. We've always been the kind of parents who believe in giving our kids responsibility as they get older. Our son is 16. He can cook basic meals, manage his own schedule, lock up the house, and handle emergencies if they come up. Our daughter is 12, and while she's still younger, she's mature enough that leaving her home with her older brother is something we've done plenty of times without any issues. My wife and I don't get many days to ourselves. Between work, the kids' schedules, and everything else life throws at us, finding a full day to just breathe is rare. So when our friends reached out and suggested a hiking trip followed by dinner, we jumped at it. We planned it out the week before. We made sandwiches for the kids for lunch, left the house stocked, and called my wife's mom to ask if she'd be willing to drop off dinner later in the evening since we'd be gone past lunchtime. We made it very clear what we were asking for. My wife called her mom and explained that we were going hiking and then to dinner with friends and would be out into the evening. She asked if her mom could bring the kids something to eat for dinner. Around 6 or so, her mom agreed without hesitation. My wife made sure to tell her she didn't have to stay, just drop it off, and that would be more than enough. And honestly, that's the full extent of what we asked. We've told her before that she is welcome to hang around if she wants, and she doesn't have internet at her place and sometimes likes to use ours to watch shows, but we have never once told her she had to stay. And she never had before. The day was incredible. We hit the trail early, spent hours out in the open air, and by the time we sat down for dinner with our friends, everyone was in great spirits. After dinner, our friends invited us back to their place to keep the evening going. We hadn't seen them in months, so we said yes. Time got away from us, the way it does when you're actually enjoying yourself for once. Then my wife's phone rang. It was her mom. Her mom wanted to know where we were and made a point of saying how late it had gotten. My wife told her we were still at our friend's place and that we'd be heading home soon. Her mom repeated that it was very late, and my wife assured her again that we were on our way. We wrapped things up, said our goodbyes, and started the drive home. I wasn't worried. The kids were fine. Our son had texted my wife earlier in the evening, completely normal, no emergencies, no problems. When we pulled into the driveway, I expected to walk into a quiet house. What I did not expect was to walk into my own living room and find my mother-in-law sitting there on the couch, stiff as a board, arms crossed, with an expression like we'd done something criminal. No TV on, nothing in her hands. Just her, sitting there waiting for us like a disappointed parent, waiting up for a teenager who broke curfew. She started before we even got our shoes off. She wanted to know if we had any idea what time it was and pointed out that our son was still awake, saying he had no business being up that late. I want to be clear about something. Our son stays up late sometimes. He's 16. Managing a 16-year-old's sleep schedule on a weekend when he's home with his brother is not exactly our top priority. Our daughter had already gone to bed hours earlier. But more than that, I was standing in my own house being talked to like I had snuck in past some kind of curfew, and that did not sit well with me at all. I told her plainly that she didn't have to stay and that we had only asked her to drop off dinner. She shot back that someone had to be there. I told her the kids were fine and that they'd stayed home alone plenty of times before. She came right back with the fact that we never told her when we were coming home or where we'd be. I reminded her that we told her we were going hiking and then to dinner, and that was exactly what we did. She said that was all we gave her, that we never mentioned anything about being out until that hour. My wife stepped in and tried to keep things from escalating. She told her mom that we hadn't known ourselves how late the evening would go, that it just stretched longer than we expected. Her mom wasn't having it. She told us it was disrespectful, that we hadn't kept her told about where we were or when we'd be back, and that she'd been sitting there with no idea what was going on. I had been patient up to that point, but the word disrespectful pushed me over the edge. I told her that we hadn't asked her to stay and that staying had been her own choice. We had asked her to bring the kids dinner, not to babysit, and that our son was 16 years old, not a toddler. She didn't respond to that directly. She just grabbed her things, walked to the front door, and slammed it hard enough that I heard it from down the hallway. The next day she called my wife and walked back her tone from the night before. She told my wife it hadn't really been about the time, that she had just been worried and didn't know where we were or when to expect us. She pointed out that we had said we were going hiking and to dinner and left it at that. My wife acknowledged that what she said was true, that we had said exactly that, but explained that the evening just took on a life of its own from there. Her mom said we should have called. And here's the thing. If she had come to us out of genuine concern and said all of that in a warm tone, we would have understood. We would have apologized for not checking in and left it at that. But that's not what happened. What happened was two adults being scolded in their own home by someone who inserted themselves into a situation they were never asked to be in, and then got angry about the results of their own choice. We asked her to drop off food. We did not ask her to wait. We did not ask her to monitor the time. We did not ask her to appoint herself the household supervisor for the evening. She decided to stay. She decided to wait up, and then she decided to be furious at us for not accommodating a role we never gave her. My wife handled the follow-up call with grace, far more than I would have managed on my own. She told her mom that they loved her and appreciated that she cared, but made it clear that we were the parents, and that we were the ones who made the calls about our kids. She told her that next time she brought dinner, she was welcome to stay if she wanted, but that if she did, it was her choice, and not something we owed her an explanation for. Her mom went quiet for a long moment, and then said she just worried about everyone. My wife told her they knew that, but that worry didn't give her the right to come at us the way she had the night before. There was no apology. Not a real one anyway. But my wife had said what needed to be said, and she said it clearly. I've been into photography since I was a teenager. It started with my dad's old film camera that he left behind when he moved out. He didn't take much with him, but that camera was the one thing I was glad he forgot. I taught myself everything. How to read light, how to find the right angle, how to be patient enough to wait for the perfect shot. By the time I was in my mid-20s, I had turned that hobby into a real career. Nature photography specifically. No portraits, no events, no people. Just trees, rivers, birds, insects, fog rolling over hills at dawn. That was my thing and I was good at it. I had built up a solid client base selling prints and licensing images to magazines and stock photo platforms. My gear was everything to me. I saved for over a year to buy my current camera body, $5,000. That doesn't include the lenses, the bag, the filters. That camera was my livelihood, and I treated it like it was made of glass. On the day this all happened, I had driven out to a nature reserve about 40 minutes from where I live. There was a trail I had been scoping for weeks, waiting for the light to be right. It was a Saturday morning in early autumn, and the conditions were perfect. Cool air, golden light cutting through the trees. A small creek running along the path. I got there at around 7 a.m. and started making my way down the trail. I had been shooting for about 2 hours by the time I reached a clearing near a picnic area. The picnic area was off to the side of the trail, not really where I was focused. I was crouched down near some tall grass photographing a dragonfly resting on a reed. I wasn't paying attention to anything else. Then I heard footsteps coming fast in my direction. Before I even had time to look up, a woman was standing over me screaming that I had been taking pictures of her kids and demanding I hand over my camera immediately. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about and that I was photographing the creek. She called me a liar and said she had been watching me for 20 minutes, pointing my camera in her direction. Then she called me a predator. I tried to stay calm and explained that I was a nature photographer, that I had been shooting dragonflies in the water, and that there were no people in any of my shots. She didn't want to hear it. Before I could even stand up fully, she grabbed my camera. I tried to hold on. She yanked harder, and when I didn't let go fast enough, she slammed it down onto the gravel path. The sound it made was something I will never forget. That hollow crack of something expensive and irreplaceable hitting the ground. The lens shattered. The body cracked along the side. I just stared at it for a second because my brain couldn't process what had just happened. I told her she had just destroyed a $5,000 piece of equipment and that it was my job on the line. She told me I deserved it for creeping around children with a camera. Other people at the picnic area had started watching by now. A couple of them had their phones out. I picked up what was left of my camera, checked the memory card slot, and found that the card had somehow survived the fall completely intact. I held onto it carefully and pulled out my phone to call the police. While we waited, Karen stood there with her arms crossed, acting like she had done something heroic. Her kids, who looked completely unbothered, were still playing on the equipment nearby. They hadn't even noticed any of this. 2 officers arrived at around 9:30 a.m. Karen immediately launched into her version of events, telling them I had been lurking around the picnic area for a long time and that she genuinely believed I was photographing her children. One of the officers turned to me and asked for my side. I told him I was a professional nature photographer, that I had been on the trail since early morning and that everything I shot that day was still on the memory card, and I could prove it right there. I popped the card into my phone using a small adapter I always carry with me and pulled up the files. The officer scrolled through image after image. Dragonflies, a hawk sitting in a dead tree, moss on wet rocks, fog over the creek, reflections in still water, not a single human being in any of them. Not even a blurry figure in the background. The officer told Karen plainly that there were no pictures of any children on the card and that everything on it was nature photography. Karen refused to accept it and fired back that it didn't prove anything and that I could have deleted the photos. The officer explained to her that the file metadata showed the full sequence of shots and that there were no gaps in the numbering anywhere. One of the bystanders who had been watching the whole thing walked over and told the officers that he had seen everything from the start and that I had never once pointed my camera toward the picnic area. Another person who had been nearby said the same thing. Karen's face shifted then, not into embarrassment, into anger, like she was furious that nothing was going her way. I told her she had destroyed a $5,000 piece of equipment over absolutely nothing, and that she owed me for it. She told me she didn't owe me a thing and that I had been acting suspicious. I looked at her and called her a mad woman. What happened next I genuinely did not see coming. She slapped me, open palm, right across my face in front of both officers. For a second, nobody moved. Then both officers moved at the same time. Karen screamed at them to get their hands off her, insisted she had rights, and called herself the real victim in all of this. She pulled her arm back and tried to twist away, and that was all it took. One officer took her to the ground. She went face down on the gravel path, the same gravel her kids had been playing near moments ago. While her children finally looked up from the playground to see what was happening, she was cuffed and placed in the back of the patrol car. The bystanders who had spoken up earlier gave formal statements to the second officer before anyone left. Karen was charged with destruction of property, assault on me, and assault on the officer she had tried to pull away from. I filed a civil suit shortly after. I brought the destroyed camera body, the shattered lens, and repair assessments from 2 separate shops that both confirmed it was a total loss. I also documented the income I lost during the weeks it took me to sort through everything and get back to work properly. The court took all of it into account. Between the camera body, the destroyed lens, the lost income, and the additional damages tied to the assault, the restitution amount the court awarded me covered everything and then some. Karen had to pay every cent. I still shoot nature, still get up before dawn to catch the right light, still crouch in tall grass waiting for a dragonfly to hold still. I just do it with a new camera now, one she paid for. My wife and I had been talking about doing a full foliage trip for years. Every autumn, we'd see the pictures online, the bursts of orange and red and gold across the hills of New England, and we'd say the same thing. Next year. And then next year would come and something always got in the way. Work schedules, family stuff, money being tight. But this past fall, we finally did it. We booked a foliage train tour up in New Hampshire. The kind where you board an old commuter rail car, ride up through the mountains, stop somewhere for lunch, and then ride back. Nothing fancy. Just the 2 of us, some sandwiches, and a whole lot of trees doing their thing. I'd done a little research beforehand, which is just how I am. I like knowing what I'm getting into. I read that the train used old commuter rail cars with bench seats, the kind that face each other 4 to a section if everyone was friendly enough not to mind their knees touching. I also read that seats weren't reserved. First come, first served. And here's the thing I picked up from a couple of forum posts and reviews from people who had done the tour before. On the way up, one side of the car had better views than the other. The right side, if I'm remembering it correctly, was mostly facing hillside and tree line that was fine but nothing to write home about. The left side opened up to the wider valley views, the ones that showed the full spread of color across the hills. Now, the way this tour worked was that the train went up the route, stopped for lunch, and then came back down the exact same tracks. But here's what made it interesting. The train had 2 engines, one on each end. So on the way back, it didn't turn around. It just reversed down the same tracks. That meant the side you were sitting on going up became the better side on the way back. Basically, if you sat on what felt like the worst side on the way up, you'd be rewarded with the better views on the return trip. My wife and I had figured this out ahead of time, so we made sure to get to the platform early. We were probably among the first 10 people to board. We walked straight to the seats we'd already decided on, settled in, and felt pretty good about ourselves. Small victory. The kind that makes a trip feel like everything is going right. Not long after we sat down, a couple settled into the seats directly behind us. A younger couple seemed relaxed and happy, clearly there for the same reason we were. We exchanged a few smiles. The car was filling up slowly, but there were still plenty of open seats on the other side and farther back. Nobody was scrambling for anything. Then this older man walked down the aisle. I put him somewhere in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. He was dressed neatly, walking with a kind of deliberate energy that told you he was used to getting what he wanted without having to ask twice. He had a woman with him, presumably his wife, trailing just a step behind. He stopped right next to the couple behind us. He didn't look around the car. He didn't look at the other available seats. He just told them they needed to move because those were his seats. The couple behind us looked at each other and said they hadn't realized the seats were reserved. The man made it clear they weren't reserved, but insisted he and his wife had been sitting there before stepping off the train for a moment, and that the couple had taken their spots. I turned slightly at that point. Not fully, just enough, because what he said didn't add up. We had been on that train since boarding began. Those seats behind us had been empty the entire time. Nobody had put a jacket down or left a bag or done anything to signal they were coming back. And even if they had, that's not how unreserved seating works on a tour train. You don't get to ghost a seat and then come back and muscle someone out of it. My wife had heard the whole thing too, and she looked at me with a kind of expression that said she was thinking exactly what I was thinking. The couple behind us was visibly uncomfortable. You could hear it in their voices. They went back and forth with him for maybe 2 minutes, which felt like 10. At one point, the younger guy even looked around the car, maybe hoping someone would back him up or that a conductor would appear. Nobody stepped in, and then they caved. They picked up their stuff and moved across the aisle to the other side. The old man waved his wife over like he'd just handled some minor administrative task. She sat down without a word. My wife leaned over and whispered to me that if it had been us, we would not have moved. I nodded and told her not a chance. And I meant it, because here's the thing. We had done our homework, we got there early, we chose those seats on purpose, and there is no version of that situation where I hand over something I planned for and earned just because someone decided their comfort mattered more than the truth. The train departed not long after, and the ride up was genuinely beautiful, even on our side, which was the less impressive one going up. The hills were doing exactly what we came to see, but I kept thinking about the couple across the aisle. They were sitting on the better side for the trip up, sure, but they'd gotten there because someone pushed them around, not because they'd earned it. And more than that, they didn't know what we knew. When we stopped for lunch, everyone filtered off the train and spread out. My wife and I grabbed a table, ordered some food, and talked about the morning. She brought up the old man again. She said it bothered her not because of the seats, but because nobody pushed back. Not the couple, not anyone around them. The man had just counted on the social pressure of the moment doing his work for him, and it had. We finished lunch and reboarded. My wife and I got back to our seats first and settled in again. The old man and his wife came back a few minutes later, looked satisfied, and sat down behind us without a word to anyone. The train started moving, and this is where the whole thing starts to come together. On the return trip, with the train reversing down the same tracks, the valley opened up fully on our side of the car. The same hills we've been looking at all morning were now framed differently, wider, more open, the kind of view that fills the whole window. The old man's side, the side he'd bullied his way onto, was now facing the hillside, the less interesting side. I watched him figure it out slowly. First he leaned toward the window, then he pulled back. Then he looked across the aisle at our side. His wife said something to him quietly and he didn't respond. He just sat there with a look of someone who had won something and then found out it wasn't worth what he thought it was. The couple he pushed out of those seats were on our side of the car now, a few rows up. I watched them leaning toward their windows, pointing things out to each other, clearly getting exactly the view they would have had if they'd just been left alone. He looked over at us at one point. I looked right back at him. Neither of us said a word, but we both knew exactly what had happened. He'd pushed people around to get the better seats and ended up with the worst view. And all that energy he'd spent making a scene had gotten him absolutely nothing. I grew up in a household where my parents drilled two things into us: respect people's time and stand up for those who can't stand up for themselves. My dad worked service jobs most of his life. He knew what it felt like to be bulldozed by someone who thought their time mattered more than everyone else's. So I guess that's where it comes from. Last year, we finally took the family trip we've been planning for what felt like forever. My wife and I had been talking about taking the kids to Greece for years, and we finally made it happen. Our oldest had just finished a Greek history course at university, so the timing felt right. We booked everything, packed our bags, and flew out to Crete. It was everything we hoped it would be. The food, the weather, the history, everywhere you looked. One of the stops on our trip was a very well-appointed museum, the kind of place that makes you feel the weight of thousands of years just by walking through the doors. We were all genuinely excited. We got in line outside and settled in for the wait. The line wasn't bad at all. The staff were organized and moving things along at a good pace. Ahead of us was a lovely elderly couple from Canada. We'd been chatting with them for about 15 to 20 minutes while the line moved forward. They were warm, funny, and genuinely thrilled to be there. The kind of people who make a wait feel shorter just by being around them. Then the tour guide showed up. She had a group of about 20 people trailing behind her. and from the moment I spotted her weaving through the crowd, I could tell she was on a mission. I understand how tour guiding works. You've got a schedule, a group to manage, and tickets to buy in bulk. I get it. But what she did next had nothing to do with logistics. She didn't politely excuse herself or ask the couple if she could step ahead. She physically pushed past them. The elderly woman stumbled slightly, and her husband reached out to steady her, with a look on his face that mixed shock with a kind of quiet dignity that stopped him from saying a word. The tour guide barely looked back. She got to the front, bought her 20 tickets, and herded her group inside like nothing had happened. A few people around us exchanged looks. Some raised eyebrows, a few shakes of the head. The museum staff saw the whole thing and did absolutely nothing. The Canadian couple just smiled at each other and moved forward when the line resumed. Too polite to make a scene, too decent to cause a fuss. I looked at my wife and she already knew what I was thinking before I even opened my mouth. I told her I wasn't going to do anything bad, just that I had an idea. She looked at me with that expression she's had for years, the one that says she knows exactly what I'm planning and wants no part of it. She took a small step back, told me she was going to pretend she didn't know me for the next hour, and was already smiling by the time she finished saying it. We got our tickets and headed inside. I pulled the kids together quietly when we walked in and pointed out the tour guide moving ahead of us with her group. My oldest recognized her immediately as the woman who had shoved the elderly couple in line. I confirmed it and told them we were going to be very enthusiastic tourists for the next little while, planting ourselves right in front of everything the tour guide was trying to show her group. The younger ones needed a second to catch on, but once they did, they were completely on board. My oldest especially, who had spent an entire semester studying this exact period of history, got a gleam in her eye that I recognized because it looked exactly like mine. We spotted the tour guide leading her group into the first exhibition hall and positioned ourselves right in front of the display she was heading toward. By the time she arrived with her group and opened her mouth to begin, we were already there. My oldest launched into everything she knew about Minoan civilization, talking about how it was one of the earliest Bronze Age cultures in Europe, and how their palace complexes were enormous. I kept the questions coming, asking her how large these places actually were, and she ran with it, explaining that Knossos alone had over 1,000 rooms, and that the Minoans had running water long before most ancient civilizations did. My youngest kept the questions going too, genuinely surprised by what was being shared, and the three of us kept a lively back and forth going right in front of the display. The tour guide cleared her throat behind us. Her group shuffled and craned their necks, trying to see around us. We didn't move. We weren't blocking anyone else, just her. I asked my oldest about the connection between Minoan culture and the legend of the Minotaur, and she explained that the labyrinth from the myth was thought to be based on the layout of these massive palace complexes. The tour guide's voice got louder behind us when she tried to push through her explanation over ours. Her group started murmuring among themselves, confused about where to look and who to listen to. We moved into the second exhibition hall ahead of her. By this point, she had clearly figured out what was happening. She walked into the second hall and found us already stationed in front of the next display. I looked right at her, gave her a smile, and turned back to my kids like nothing had happened. She tried to redirect her group to a different part of the hall. Two of my kids were already over there. My middle one waved me over to look at something, and I strolled across the room while the tour guide had to move her group yet again to find a clear angle. In the third exhibition hall, we hit our stride completely. My oldest was in full flow at this point, genuinely enjoying herself, going deep into everything she knew about Minoan frescoes and what the fragments found in the ruins told archaeologists about the colors and patterns they used. The back and forth between us was loud enough that the tour guide had to keep raising her voice just to compete with it. At one point, she tried skipping ahead to the large Minoan palace reconstruction that dominated one of the later rooms, probably hoping to get a clean run at something before we showed up. She walked in and found two of my kids already standing right in front of it, deep in conversation about the timber framing and how researchers believed it had been brightly painted based on fragments found at the site. I strolled in, asked a few questions, and we picked right back up where we had left off. The tour guide stopped walking when she saw us there. She stood still for a moment and just looked at me. I gestured toward the reconstruction and remarked on how incredible it was, keeping my voice pleasant and my face completely even. She turned without a word and started organizing her group at a different angle. We eventually drifted off after the fourth exhibition hall, found my wife waiting with a coffee and an expression that said she had thoroughly enjoyed her peaceful solo tour of the museum, and we spent the rest of the afternoon genuinely exploring everything the place had to offer. The four of us still laugh about it. My oldest calls it our combined field operation. My wife calls it the most predictable thing I've ever done. I call it a perfectly reasonable tour of a magnificent museum. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.